Okay. Well, thank you for joining me, Diego. I'm sitting here together with my client, Diego, who is a mastermind program client. And today we're going to have a little conversation about business development and Diego's journey over the last couple of years. So I'm very happy to have you with me, Diego, and interested in
Good to be.
hearing what you have to say. So I think
No problem.
excellent. I think the starting point would be maybe to tell everybody a little bit about yourself before we get going.
No, I'd love to, Dan, and thank you for the opportunity. Um, One of the things that Dan missed in the introduction is that I'm a very satisfied performance law and masterminds client of Dan's. Um, a little bit about myself. I have been a practicing attorney for over 38 years. I practice mostly in Texas, in the southwest part of the United States. Um, for almost 30 years, I was in-house counsel with Southwestern Bell AT&T, and I retired from that position back in January of 2019. When I retired, I wanted to set up an ADR business, predominantly arbitration, but I also wanted to do mediation. And so, as I began to develop my business, um, um, I had some unique challenges. First of all, my practice started in South Texas, so I was very familiar with the legal community in South Texas. Felt comfortable there. Well, in 2008, about 11 years before I retired, AT&T transferred me to the Dallas Fort Worth area, where I was not as well known, didn't know the legal community as well. So for when I decided to set up my own business, that was going to be a little bit of a challenge for me. When I started to set this business up, I learned very quickly that I was a little bit behind the eight ball because I didn't know a lot of the attorneys in North Texas, still knew the ones in South Texas. And so I was looking for an edge. I was looking for something to help me with regards to how do I reach out to these folks? Because there's the usual, we all, as attorneys, we all think that, well, if you hang out at the courthouse, watch the litigators, which is what many mediators basically use as a basis, going to bar meetings. Um, I still wasn't going to be able to build that level of trust, that level of confidence lawyers had in me because they hadn't worked with me. So I was looking for a way to market myself, market my brand, so to speak. Um, and just as I was looking at that, I came across some of the performance laws information, which was kind of a precursor to what Dan eventually started, which was Mastermind. Um, and so I started to get
Yeah,
more
you
and
were
more
an early
interest.
joiner.
Yeah, I was, and I started to get more interested in it just as COVID hit. This would be like March of 2020, when things radically changed for everybody. So at that time, Dan offered an online coaching for online mediations, and so because Zoom had taken was starting to take off, so I had scheduled a Zoom mediation, so I wanted to get some pointers just to make sure that I was doing everything right. So I took Dan offered a focused coaching on Zoom mediations. I took that class and I was very, very satisfied. I liked his approach to things. And during the course of that coaching, Dan mentioned some things with regards to some tips, pointers with regards to how to market yourself, how to get your practice out there, and that kind of was a little bit of a teaser for me in a sense, but in a good way because it got me thinking. Well, this is kind of what I need, and another reason why I took the class was I had seen a lot of Dan's discussions and point publications, his posts on LinkedIn, that started kind of getting me interested in his program. So I said, I may give it a shot. So I reached out to Dan, talked to him about it, and I said, well, let me think about it. But I'd like to talk to some of your clients. So he referred me to Jim Miller, who was a retired judge up in Denver, Colorado. And bear in mind, I'm in Texas, and so Colorado is, totally different market. But I talked to Jim, and I said, talk to me about, working with Dan, the coaching, and Jim was very upbeat. And Jim's ADR practice was trying to focus on a different direction than I was. But what impressed me about what Jim
Actually, in
was
a
telling me was,
quite the opposite direction, right?
well,
Without
oh,
going
very
into
much, very,
details, but
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well, yeah, exactly. And but what was interesting was that Jim said, a lot of the things he's talking about, Diego, he says he was telling me are common sense. But the thing is, we as lawyers, one of the things that they don't teach us in professional school, and we have to learn on our own, is how to build our business, how to
mm,
market our business, and we're really not taught that effectively. Jim had been in the situation where he had been a judge for several years, so he hadn't had to focus on that. And I faced the same challenge because I was an in-house attorney, and while I marketed myself to my internal clients, I had little to no experience marketing to folks outside, and the dynamics of that had changed. We now had social media, we had all kinds of things. The pandemic was there. So Jim was telling me about how the coaching had really helped him. And he said, I highly recommend him, give him a shot. So I said, you know what, I'm going to. um and part of me was at first a little bit, um I don't want to say apprehensive, but I guess I had questions like anybody else would whenever you enter into something like this, because it doesn't it require an investment, of not only time but of some money. So I was thinking, is this going to be well spent? But then as I thought about it, I said, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot. And I'm so glad I did, because what I found about the coaching more than anything else, because uh, Dan's program, your program, Dan, as you well know, um, it's very structured. It has these milestones, and what I liked was when I sat down with you initially, we went over my business, what I do, not what Jim Miller did. You didn't have like a one size fits all. Here's what it is, and see if your business fits within it. It wasn't that at
very
all.
important. Yeah,
Oh yeah, yours was tailor made for me. So we talked about what my business, what I was trying to do, who I was targeting, and what I wanted to do. And then once we did that, then the milestones. That's how Dan called each step of his program. The milestones began to be tailor made. So when Dan would send me these milestones, uh, which were great, incidentally. And there were 11 of them at the time, and they were tailor made for me. I mean, clearly Dan had his focus that he works on with every client, but it's not so much that it's like a one size fits all. It's more like a playbook that you would see in like basketball or football, that basically says, here's the basic play, but clearly circumstances are going to change, so you can
mm,
adapt it. And that's what I liked about it. And we would go over each one of those over the course of the program. We would go over those. um, and what I loved about them more than anything else was that I continue to rely on those, even though Dan, gosh, I think you and I, were in that course together initially. I think it was about a year ago, come to think of it.
yeah, yeah. It's a
And
little over a year ago. Yeah,
yeah, and what I really like is I continue to use those. One of the things that you know, with any business, with any successful venture, is you have to establish a routine, a discipline. And now, one of the things that I've established, one of the disciplines that I've established, is that I regularly review the milestones. If not on a daily basis, at least on a weekly basis, where I go over them. And it's interesting how now, when I go back over the milestones, because again, each milestone, Dan would send me written materials, and I put them all in one binder. And so I will review those. And it's interesting that um, as I go back and reflect on them, read them again, and read what I had initially wrote back when I took the milestones, and discussed them with Dan, how how either the business has changed, my business has changed, or how circumstances out there have changed. But what I
Mm,
find is the practice points, uh, the suggestions that he gave within those milestones is universal. And so now it's just a matter of tweaking it here or there. But that's really helped me with my business. So my investment continues to pay off. It's really well to the point where my business now has evolved. I've
mm,
gotten more, I got more business, and surprisingly, um, I was trying to build up my mediation practice. My arbitration practice was beginning to grow. But what was interesting, Dan, is, and I think I told you about this before, is that I continued to use those uh, milestones, those points in developing my arbitration practice. Well, my arbitration practice grew stronger. My mediation practice is growing and
mm.
is developing more and more. My brand now is much more known now in North Texas than it was when I started. And quite frankly, if I think without the coaching, I'd probably still be languishing a little bit on the mediation side of things. But now I've gotten a foothold in the North Texas area, and so things are beginning to grow. Um, and one of the things about the program, and really for me, I think I call it more a discipline more than anything else. Um, One of the things I found about the discipline is that as I continue to follow the suggestions, continue to do what a lot of the coaching suggestions that Dan gives, my brand is just getting stronger and stronger, and more people are finding out about me. I'm getting more and more calls now from attorneys on a variety of things, and so it's been really good. It's been
It's
really good.
incremental, right? These are timeless business development activities that you're doing. It's just that it's obviously designed specifically for obtaining work from attorneys, and it's not something that happens overnight. But what you are now starting to see is obviously the results of all of this effort, and it just keeps accelerating. And mind you,
Oh,
you got these results in the middle of the pandemic, because I always laugh when you say that I met Dan in the middle of the pandemic. So it's quite impressive what you've been able to do, Diego.
oh yeah, no, and really, what I liked about it, Dan, more than anything else, is a lot of this stuff. If you think about it, and I think you would even admit, a lot of it is common sense. But what I liked about it was that, yeah, it's really like working with a coach, because when if you're an athlete and you work with a coach is going to tell an athlete a lot of things that make sense. But sometimes hearing it from somebody else, seeing it from a different perspective,
Mm,
and then having it in writing so that you go back and incorporate that discipline into your practice, uh, it just enhances, it just grows. And I
yeah.
found, and you're right, Dan, it's not instantaneous. Gosh, I wish it was. If of course,
Yeah,
if it
me
was, you
too.
could probably charge a lot more. But the beautiful thing about it is that once you begin to incorporate it into your business, and make it a part of your daily regimen, your daily routine with regards to your business, you will see results. You have to work at it. And it's interesting because Jim, when I met with Jim and had that discussion, Jim told me that. Jim said, this is something you're going to have to work in. Dan's not going to do the work for you, but he's going to tell you how to do the work. And in some ways, it's better that way, because as you do the work, you begin to develop your own style with it as well, and you
Precisely.
incorporate your style into it. So it really works out well. So that's kind of the way it's worked for me. It continues to work for me, and realistically, I think it's going to continue to work for me. um so yeah. The other thing too, Dan, that I think really worked well is because I was with you right around the time that we began the mastermind group, where we
Yeah.
began to have your other clients come together. And what I really liked about the group was how diverse we were. Here I focused mostly on labor and employment. In Texas, you had neutrals, from California who were also in labor and employment. But we also had family law practitioners, we had business law practitioners, we had some neutrals, that were interested in expanding their arbitration business. We had
Expert
others that
witnesses,
wanted to,
if you
yeah,
recall.
expert
Yeah.
witnesses. That's right. And the other thing that I found really fascinating was the international component of it. We had professionals from Canada, we had professionals from Ireland, we had some from Australia, and what we all had in common is that we were all trying to develop an ADR practice where basically we were targeting attorneys. And I found that important because a lot of the principles that you were uh, that you were teaching us and coaching us on really applied to whatever discipline or specialty that we had. And it
Mm.
was interesting hearing what some of the others folks were experiencing because with some of the family lawyers, it was interesting because many of them, as they began, I think they began to think that, well, because I'm a family lawyer, you know, no one, only family lawyers can understand me. But as we would talk and they would begin to hear, well, hey, the labor and employment guys are facing the same challenges and they're doing it this way and it's working for them. Maybe I ought to try that. And I would find myself also learning from different practitioners, from the real estate practitioners, from the expert witnesses, just kind of their perspective on how they were approaching some things.
Yeah.
And it
It goes
made me
beyond
reevaluate.
business development almost, doesn't it? It's just like transcends basic things. I think you become a much better professional in the process with interacting with that kind of group, which is
Oh no,
why we put it together.
I totally agree. No, and that really worked well. It worked well for us. The other thing too is, given the group that we had, we were all interested in learning. Um, Not only learning from what you had given us, which in a lot of ways, again, a lot of the concepts that you had given us um, were fundamental. You had altered them a little bit for each one of us, but it was clear because as we were all talking together, since we were all basically learning kind of the same techniques and everything else, although we were applying it to our practices, we had that as a common denominator. So from there, we could see how people were using those techniques
Mm-hmm.
and we're finding that it enhanced the way we were using them, and it even gave us ideas that kind of went beyond what you had discussed. Because again, it as we would dialogue and talk about it, it was very much as if we were back like in a seminar classroom setting where we were exchanging ideas and building off of ideas.
Yeah.
So it was very successful.
And the
Really
group
liked it.
still obviously exists today. We're meeting regularly. There's new content coming out and so on. So it's very much active.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree. Um, and what's interesting, too, is how each of us, um, when we would get together and say, hey, this is what we're doing and this is what I'm doing, you know, you could see that with just about everybody, um, especially those of us, because with any kind of group, Dan, if you coach athletes, there's going to be some athletes that are going to be more disciplined than others. And you could see that the ones of us that were more disciplined in the way that we applied the principles, as we used the principles and went forward with them, and as we began to apply them, you could see the confidence. And I think that's so important because the confidence
Yeah,
translates into what I would call a swag, so to speak, that is very noticeable, not only among ourselves, but clearly among the attorneys that we're trying to get business from. And that becomes
absolutely.
important in selling
Yeah,
the business. And you could see that when we would get together on our in our group calls, we would have those by Zoom, and they were always a lot of fun. They were always engaging. The other thing that I thought was really good too was from time to time during the talks, we would have like a topic that Dan would suggest, or even we among ourselves would suggest from the prior meetings, and so we would have discussions on that, and and again, very much like our old days in law school, we were basically teaching ourselves how to be better at what we did with these principles.
Yeah.
So it worked out really well.
I think it's great to hear. Great to hear that feedback, Diego. And if we sort of, I guess, a couple of questions from me. I guess you've already mentioned this, but maybe as a point of clarification for anybody listening in, I assume based on what you're saying that these principles and these milestones and really the system is applicable to anybody who's targeting attorneys. Doesn't matter, what field you're in, whether you're a mediator, arbitrator, expert witness, legal consultant, or even where you are based.
I totally agree. What I liked about it, Dan, was that a lot of the principles that you teach, very much like as if you're coaching athletes. The hypothetical I think that would be very applicable is, you can be a football player, an American football player, or a European football player. You could be a basketball player, an American baseball player, or even a volleyball player. 5 different sports, but one of the things that all those sports have in common is, in order for an athlete to succeed, you have to be have a good strength and conditioning regimen. Um,
Mm,
what mastermind performance laws offers is basically that for lawyers with regards to marketing their business. And it's really great because a lot of the stuff that you talk about is common sense, and it applies regardless of whether you are a mediator focused or neutral focused on labor and employment, family law, commercial, consumer, um, or even as an expert witness. All the principles that that you worked with us on, all the milestones, are basically geared to helping us build our brand, market ourselves to attorneys,
mm,
and that's
mm,
universal, regardless of what your specialty is, and regardless of your region too. It was interesting as we'd be on these discussions, and I'd be talking to my counterparts in California and Florida. I was finding that they were experiencing the same challenges I was in
yeah,
Texas.
absolutely.
So it applies universally, regardless of location, regardless of your specialty. So yeah, I totally agree.
That's excellent. Thanks very much for clarifying that. So I guess final question, and you've kind of already answered that, but I think it's important maybe to emphasize that you joined us during the pandemic, and now as we're recording this, we're sort of I guess gradually getting out of the pandemic. So have you gotten more business, and would you recommend performance laws?
Have I gotten more business? Yes, without question. To give you an idea, I did more in the first 6 months of this year than I did in the 12 months before. And the big
Amazing.
difference was the coaching that I received. I mean, if you look at everything I was doing and what I wasn't doing, when I started doing the coaching, all of a sudden I began to see an increase in my arbitration business because I applied these principles to that. And my arbitration business was clearly the stronger of my 2 businesses between arbitration and mediation, and it's exploded. Like I said, my mediation business, which was showing some signs of life before I got the coaching, now is alive. It's vibrant, it's growing, and I'm getting more clients. I continue to expand my brand with that. So I'm starting to face the pleasant challenge now of how do I how do I work those practices together now, because one's really taking off. And
Yeah,
so I'm starting to have the pleasant problem, Dan, of having too much business, which is a good thing, and
yeah,
whether I should expand for other reasons. So yes, would I recommend the coaching? Absolutely. But something I think folks need to be prepared for is, and I think this is fair. And it's a good disclaimer, and that is, don't expect when you get the coaching, don't expect Dan to do all the work for you, because Dan will basically, it's like being an athletic, he's like an athletic coach. He can give you the basics of how to get yourself in shape and how to excel, but you have to do the work. And if you're willing to discipline yourself, if you're willing to put yourself in that regimen so that you are going to follow these techniques and build them into your practice, you will succeed. I mean, uh, uh, you just have to put the work in. And frankly, I think the more work you put into it, more effort you put into it, uh, the more you'll see results.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. I couldn't agree more.
Oh yeah. So no, I strongly, I strongly recommend the program. In fact, if anyone, if for some reason someone has a question and is considering it and would like to contact me, I've told Dan, I'm more than happy to talk to you individually. I don't make any money off of it. I don't get a royalty or anything like that. Or, but it did help my business, and for that I'm extremely grateful. And because in the end we all want to succeed, and we're all happy. If the water rises in the ocean and it lifts all the boats, that's great. And that's kind of the way I see it. So the more all of us are successful, it just helps everybody else. So that's just kind of the way I see it.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I think that's a great offer, and I'm sure that some folks will take you up on that. Obviously, it's been a great, pleasure working with you, Diego. You're still part of the mastermind, but the journey that we've been on has been fantastic. You were already doing well. You were busy, but clearly, our work has paid off, and it's been an absolute pleasure to interact with you over this time as well. I mean, it's every single call very energetic, very vibrant, very creative, and that's the way it should be. So,
Oh,
and then
absolutely.
finally, I appreciate obviously you getting on this call. I think people probably have felt that it's been useful, given them some ideas. And if you're keen on more ideas, then you can always go and visit performanceloss.com. There's more videos and free content there. I think that's pretty much it. Any final thoughts or comments from you, Diego?
No, other than I highly recommend the program, especially for those professionals that are out there that are just getting started. And maybe you've been, if you're like me, where you're about to go out and basically establish your business as a professional, neutral. I think this is a great investment
Mm,
for you, just to learn these principles so that you can learn to market your business, because that's extremely important. Because if people don't know what you're offering, and you don't know how to present yourself, this is a really good way to learn that and incorporate it into your operations. So I highly recommend it. I've got nothing but good things to say about the program.
fantastic. Thanks so much again, Diego. And we'll be in touch soon, you and I.
Oh yeah, look forward to it, Dan.
All right. Thank you very much.